Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another episode of Wacky Wednesday, a weekly series where we explore some wacky deck ideas in both Standard and Modern, and this week we're taking a look at a red-green land destruction in Modern, a deck that's trying to mess with the opponent's lands in as many ways as possible. And with the recent addition of Bloodbraid Elf to Modern, the deck got a powerful new tool, since a lot of the land destruction spells in this deck cost 3 mana, so Bloodbraid Elf can cascade into one of them, while also applying pressure to help us close out the game against an opponent struggling to play their spells. So let's take a look at the entire list, starting out with our 1-drops, where we have some mana accelerants, since a lot of the land destruction spells cost 3 or more mana, so having a way to cast them a turn ahead of schedule makes them a lot more effective. So we've got 4 copies of Arbor Elf, which helps us untap one of our forests, basically adding at least 1 mana to our mana pool. Then we've got 2 copies of Birds of Paradise, which does the same thing. And then 4 copies of Utopia Sprawl, which can enchant one of our forests. We have to choose a color as Utopia Sprawl enters the battlefield, and then when we tap the enchanted forest, we get to make a mana of the chosen color. So Utopia Sprawl combines very nicely with Arbor Elf, since Arbor Elf can untap the enchanted forest, essentially adding 2 more mana to our mana pool instead of just 1. Then we've got a whole bunch of 3 mana land destruction spells, which we're hoping to cast on turn 2 thanks to our mana accelerants. We've got 4 copies of Blood Moon, which technically doesn't destroy lands, but it does turn all non-basic lands into mountains, which is a very powerful effect, and a lot of modern decks play mostly non-basic lands, so that can be very devastating for a lot of decks. Then we have 4 copies of Stone Rain, which just destroys target land, can also be a basic land, so it can help us take care of the opponent's basic lands, while Blood Moon takes care of the non-basic ones. Then we've got 4 copies of Molten Rain, which is a little bit more difficult to cast than Stone Rain because of the double red casting cost, but it also destroys any target land, and if that land happens to be a non-basic land, Molten Rain also deals 2 damage to that opponent. Then we get to some of our creatures. We've got 3 copies of Tireless Tracker, which is great in this deck as we get a clue token whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, and then we can sacrifice those clue tokens to grow the tracker and draw extra cards. Then we also have 1 copy of Courser of Kruphix to help us hit land drops, gain some life, and get some card advantage that way since we can play lands off the top of our deck. Then we have 3 copies of Mwonvuli Acid-Moss, which anyone who played Magic Duels will already know, as a 4 mana spell that can destroy one of the opponent's lands, and then we get to search our library for a forest and put it into play tapped, so it helps us ramp while disrupting the opponent's lands. And then our 4 copies of Bloodbraid Elf, which hopefully cascades into one of our 3-drops and not one of our 1-drop accelerants. Then we've got some additional finishers, 2 copies of Stormbreath Dragon, which dodges most spot removal spells in Modern, being a 5 mana 4/4 with Flying, Haste and Protection from White, and then the Monstrosity ability is actually quite good in this deck, since the opponent will be stuck with some cards in their hand that they cannot cast. Then we've got 1 copy of Primal Command, which is quite versatile. It can act as an additional land destruction spell by putting one of the opponent's lands on top of their deck. We can simply gain some life against burn decks, we can shuffle the opponent's graveyard into their deck if they're on a graveyard deck, or we can just search our library for a creature to put into our hand, so we can get an additional finisher. And speaking of finishers, we also have 2 copies of Inferno Titan, which is a 6 mana 6/6 that when he enters a battlefield or attacks, we get to distribute 3 damage however we want among the opponent's creatures or their life total. And Inferno Titan also has fire breathing, so we can pay red to give the Titan +1/+0 until end of turn. Then our mana base is pretty straightforward. We have a lot of basic forests, since we are playing Blood Moon, so basic forests still allow us to cast all our green spells. Then we have 1 basic mountain to search up with our fetch lands, 4 Stomping Grounds, which both count as a forest or a mountain, but we do have to be careful not to enchant our Stomping Ground with our Utopia Sprawl, because if we then play a Blood Moon afterwards, the Utopia Sprawls will fall off our Stomping Ground, but that's not the case with enchanting a basic forest. And then a total of 8 fetch lands, all green, so we can search up our basic forests, so 4 Windswept Heath and 4 Wooded Foothills. Then taking a quick look at the sideboard, we have 1 copy of Abrade to deal with creatures or artifacts. Then Ancient Grudge is the real way to deal with artifacts, since we can also flash it back, destroying up to 2 artifacts with it. Then we have 2 copies of Anger of the Gods, which is great against go-wide creature decks, and can also exile recursive creatures like Kitchen Finks or Voice of Resurgence. Then we have 1 copy of Choke, which is great against blue decks, keeping all their islands tapped. Then we have 3 copies of Kitchen Finks against burn decks or aggro decks to gain some life back. Then we have 2 copies of Pithing Needle, which can shut off activated abilities, including those of Planeswalkers like Jace the Mind Sculptor. We have 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus to deal with graveyard decks. And then we have 2 copies of Trinisphere, which is very punishing against decks with a lot of cantripping effects, or decks with a low land count. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw, and I think this is a keep. We have Utopia Sprawl to help us cast turn 2 Blood Moon or Stone Rain. For opponents can somehow get rid of the Utopia Sprawl, or hand could be a little slow, but hopefully that doesn't happen. Opponent with the Bloodstain Mire into Overgrown Tomb, so we could see a turn 1 hand disruption spell, and indeed there's the Inquisition, which I'm guessing is just gonna take the Utopia Sprawl here. We did pick up Stomping Ground, which we might as well play tapped here to preserve our life total. So no turn 2 Blood Moon or Stone Rain, and the opponent knowing about Blood Moon can also help them fetch out basic lands, but the opponent just with 1 land says go. Interesting. They might have kept a land light hand, and they're certainly gonna get punished here by the land destruction deck. Alright, they do have a Blackleaf Cliffs now, but Blood Moon could be very effective here, so let's get a forest. Our opponent could be holding up an Abrupt Decay, so now the question is, do we wanna go with Stone Rain first? But given that we just picked up 2 more copies of Blood Moon, we're actually fine if our opponent's Abrupt Decay is the first copy. So let's run out Blood Moon. See if our opponent floats mana in response here. Yep. Alright, Blood Moon comes down, and now we'll see the Abrupt Decay, most likely. Yep. Alright, that's fine. So we basically have to hope that our opponent doesn't deploy a threat this turn, since the next Blood Moon is probably gonna shut them off most plays. And Inquisition can take Blood Moon, but we have another one, or it can take the Stone Rain, which seems the most logical pick unless they have another hand disruption spell. And their opponent's not happy about it, and in fact they scoop it up. So onto sideboarding we go right away against a Junt deck. Don't think we need to sideboard much in this matchup, to be honest. Kitchen Finks can be good against cards like Liliana of the Veil, Relic of Progenitus, shrinks down Tarmogoyfs, which could be a reason to board it in. Don't really see any cards I would want to take out, so I think we just run it back. And this opening hand seems great. We've got a turn 2 Blood Moon, and opponent leads with Raging Ravine. So let's go ahead and play Forests, enchanted with Utopia Sprawl. And I think we name red here. That way we can play Windswept Heath to get a forest and still cast Blood Moon. Opponent could have Abrupt Decay to destroy the Utopia Sprawl. And they are getting a basic swamp here to play around Blood Moon. And Scavenging Ooze to play. Alright. Another Bloodbraid Elf to pick up. So here I think the play is just to get another basic forest, then play Utopia Sprawl on the original forest, and I think we still name red, because otherwise our opponent can just destroy the one naming red with Abrupt Decay, and then we're shut off of red. And then we'll play the Blood Moon. Say go. Opponent does have another swamp, and there's Liliana of the Veil, which is gonna be quite effective here, so we have to decide which creature to get rid of. I think we just discard the Courser of Kruphix here, since we might not get immediate value out of it. And then our Bloodbraid Elves can hopefully wear down the Liliana, especially if the Scavenging Ooze attacks here. Right, Scavenging Ooze stays on defense. We did pick up a land, which we could play to get a clue, but now that we have a Blood Moon in play, we can't actually fetch, so we would only get 1 clue token with the tracker. So I think we actually keep the land in hand here to discard to Liliana, and we're just gonna run out Bloodbraid Elf number 1, trigger Cascade, and Stone Rain is gonna get rid of the opponent's swamp. And then I'm more than fine attacking the Liliana here and trading for Scavenging Ooze. Opponent does indeed trade. So with the next Liliana uptick, we will discard the Foothills, I think. Opponent with a Dark Confidant now as well. Let's discard the Foothills. And Molten Rain to pick up, but we're still just gonna continue playing out Bloodbraid Elves. And Stone Rain can get rid of the swamp. And we'll keep pressuring Liliana here. Opponent can just take the hit and then use Liliana to get rid of the elf. Dark Confidant reveals another Dark Confidant, which they are probably unable to cast since Junt usually only plays 2 swamps and they're already gone. And their opponent just scoops it up, unable to cast any more spells. Bloodbraid Elf did a lot of work this game, cascading into 2 land destruction spells, keeping the opponent off of black. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw here, and this hand could fail if our opponent kills our Birds of Paradise immediately, but I think I'm gonna keep because we do have the turn 2 Blood Moon potentially. Opponent with Plains Go. So far they are unaffected by Blood Moon, but we'll see if that changes. Alright, basic forest into Fleecemane Lion, interesting. So Blood Moon actually not very effective here, which could be a reason to run out the Courser of Kruphix instead. But now that we picked up Stomping Ground, we also have the option of casting Molten Rain, which I kind of like. Yeah, I think we're just taking 2 here and casting a Molten Rain. And I think I'm gonna hit the opponent's forest here, which is more likely to let them cast all their creatures in their deck. Opponent will not take any damage, but that's fine. Opponent's gonna go to attacks first, get in for 3 points, but next turn we can play Courser and gain a life right away, and then the Courser will be a nice blocker for the Lion. And our opponent just passes, so they're stuck on 1 land, and Primal Command will let us bounce that land in the future. So let's go ahead and play our Courser of Kruphix first. See if we have a land on top. We don't, but an Acid-Moss. And then next turn we could cast the Acid-Moss to get rid of the opponent's only land. Opponent attacks, I will block. See if they have a trick or not. Doesn't look like it. And with no land to play here, our opponent's gonna be in a lot of trouble. So let's play the Forest of the Top first, and then just Acid-Moss our opponents. And I guess we get a Stomping Ground tapped. And our opponent scoops it up. Alright, on to sideboarding. Didn't get to see much from the opponent. Looks like a green-white creature deck. Anger of the Gods could be okay. Kitchen Finks could be serviceable. Don't think we want to go overboard on sideboarding since our main deck looks pretty good. Stormbreath seems excellent if the opponent's relying on Path to Exile. Perhaps we can shave a couple of copies of Blood Moon since the opponent appeared to have a lot of basic lands. And then maybe we want some Kitchen Finks instead. And yeah, I think this is fine. Alright, so this hand doesn't have any mana accelerants, and we don't even have a 3rd land to cast our 3-drops, so I think this is a mulligan. And alright, I can keep this. And with our Scry, we're basically looking for more land destruction spells. And Acid-Moss I think will do. Opponent does have Razor Verge Thicket here, but no 1-drop. So I think we just fetch up a forest with the Heath. And play out the birds. Opponent with the plains into Fleecemane Lion once again. And Bloodbraid Elf will be exciting next turn, but for now we're just gonna, I think, fetch up another forest and play out Kitchen Finks, which will do a good job of blocking the Fleecemane Lion. Opponent with a swamp also, so they're on Abzan, and Inquisition is actually gonna miss here, seeing 3 4-drops, so the opponent's not gonna be happy about that one. So it looks like the opponent's on some sort of Abzan aggro deck, but their aggressive start halted by Kitchen Finks, and here we're just going to go for the throat and Acid-Moss the opponent's land. Not sure which one we should go for first. I think we're just gonna go with the Thicket here, since that shuts off double white cards and green cards. get a Stomping Ground. I think I'm okay with attacking here, since we kind of want our opponent to attack with Alliance, since then next turn a hasty Bloodbraid Elf will go unblocked. Temple Garden, opponent has to take 2. And Lingering Souls, so that confirms our suspicion that our opponent is on some sort of Abzan aggro deck. So we could destroy the Swamp to shut off the flashback on Lingering Souls, or we can just go for the Temple Garden to shut off our opponent's green mana potentially. Yeah, I think we go with Acid-Moss instead of Bloodbraid, and we'll enchant one of our forests first. Since playing Bloodbraid into the 2 untapped spirits isn't great, and I guess we'll name red here, and then we can still play out the Acid-Moss, targeting the Swamp, and get another Stomping Ground. And now, given that we have another Kitchen Finks in hand, I'm okay with attacking here. Opponent with the forest. They have 1 card left in hand, and I don't think we need to chum block quite yet, so we'll take 5. Opponent passes. Stone Rain to draw, that's exciting. Let's start by casting Stone Rain on the Temple Garden, and then playing the Bloodbraid, and see what we cascade into. Just a bird, so not the most exciting cascade. And we'll get in for 6. And if our opponent attacks with a lion, I will likely just jump with a bird. Opponent's keeping the spirit on defense, so I will jump with a bird here. Untap another Acid-Moss, so we can just do both here. Acid-Moss the plains, I think. Get another Stomping Ground. And then I guess we can attack first. Opponent jumps, goes to 3, and then we'll play another Kitchen Finks. Back up to 11, and there we go. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand looks great. We've got a turn 2 Stone Rain, turn 3 Acid-Moss. Opponent plays Delta, says go. So they could have a Stubborn Denial for this Utopia Sprawl if they're on Grixis Death Shadow, but I think we should still run it out here. And yep, would you look at that. Stubborn Denial. Can't pay for it, so that's gonna slow us down significantly since we don't have any plays until turn 3. And Breeding Pools our opponent on a Sultai Death Shadow deck perhaps with a Grim Flare now. So that Stubborn Denial was quite effective. So we'll play Windswept Heath, say go. Fetch up a Stomping Ground end of turn. Grim Flare gets in there. That's gonna give the opponent some selection. And a Tarmogoyf as well. So we're kind of in trouble here since the opponent managed to deploy their threats under our land destruction. So we do have the option of casting a Stone Rain, but that wouldn't even take the opponent off of a color. We can just play Courser of Kruphix, which theoretically still blocks the Grim Flare and Tarmogoyf. Or we can play Tireless Tracker, do the same thing, get some clue tokens going. I think we go with the Courser. That's gonna hurt more if the opponent has a Liliana of the Veil, because then an enchantment goes to the graveyard and Tarmogoyf grows. But I think getting value out of the Tracker is more important than getting value out of the Courser. Even though in the ideal scenario we can play the Tracker and then play the Acid-Moss. There's a Molten Rain on top. And a Thoughtseize is gonna have a look at our hand, and they decide to take the 2-for-1 Bloodbraid Elf, which makes sense. 3 card types in the graveyard, and another Tarmogoyf, which is now a 5/6. So at least we can stop the Grim Flare from attacking here. but Tarmogoyf does get in for 5. Alright, Stormbreath Dragon on top, not really gonna help us here. Think we have to play the Tracker, even though it's never gonna grow big enough to trade with Tarmogoyf in time. So what's our outs? I guess we can draw into an Inferno Titan. That means we have to play the Acid-Moss and hope to hit a land off the top with Courser as well. So not very likely to happen, but there's a chance. So let's get a basic forest. There is a Stomping Ground on top, but we're just gonna shuffle that away right now. Think we take our opponent off of Overgrown Tomb, which is typically the most important land for the deck, and get a Stomping Ground tapped. And Wooded Foothills on top means we're probably not gonna win this one. Opponent can get in for 10, and in fact, they even attack with the Grimflayer. I think we're just blocking the Grimflayer. Opponent might just have another creature they want to play here. And in fact, it's Tarmogoyf number 3. Untap. Birds of Paradise on top is not going to do it, so we can play a Tireless Tracker. Play Wooded Foothills. Gain a life and make a clue. And then I guess we can sacrifice the clue to draw the birds, which is a chum blocker for Tarmogoyf. And now we have to fetch, get a forest, Stormbreath on top, play the birds, say go. But we're probably just gonna die anyways here. Traverse with 4 card types. So your opponent can get anything they want. They get a Polluted Delta, which is probably going to help them cast a Fatal Push. Opponent attacks. We have to chump all 3, which feels bad. But at least we're not dead. And a Death Shadow as well, which was to be expected. 2 Death Shadows in fact. Tap. Draw the Stormbreath. And we're actually not that far from killing our opponent, since our opponent's at 8, and Molten Rain can also deal 2 damage. But Stormbreath is not gonna do it, so we might as well crack a clue. Find a Blood Moon, which is a little too late here, so we're not gonna show it to our opponent. So, alright, they got us. So we'll move to sideboarding here against Sultai, Death Shadow. Alright, so not sure how we should sideboard. Think we just take out some Stone Rains and Acid-Moss, Courser because that grows the opponent's Goyfs. Then shave a bird since our opponent does have Fatal Pushes, maybe they have taken some out. And I think Trinisphere is going to be a little too slow for the matchup since their opponent's threats are so cheap. But I do like Kitchen Finks to buy some time. Relic should be very good against the Traverse deck, and then Choke to tap down the opponent's islands. So let's try this. We would like to be on the play. And this hand is definitely very slow, but we do have a Relic and a Kitchen Finks to buy some time. So I think this is a dubious keep, but a keep nonetheless. Don't really have any land destruction, but hopefully we can draw into it. Opponent keeps their 6. We'll lead with Relic. Say go. Inquisition. We'll target the opponent. They get to take our Kitchen Finks. And we get to keep Stormbreath and Inferno Titan. Our opponent with lots of card types going to the graveyard, now also Mishra's Bauble. So let's use a Relic. And I think we just say go here. Don't have the double red yet for Molten Rain, so that could be an issue. Opponent just says go. We'll fetch a Stomping Ground. And there's a Blood Moon, alright, that's effective. So let's target the opponent. They might fetch in response, which will make our Blood Moon quite effective if they don't get a basic land. I guess they could also just have a Stubborn Denial, but we're just gonna jam Blood Moon anyways. Don't have anything better to do. And it does get Stubborn Denialed. Opponent with 3 card types in the graveyard. Another Bauble. They're down to 10, so Death Shadow could come down here as a 3-3. Now a 5-5, and Traverse with 3 card types, so they're just looking to get a basic swamp. And now they're gonna Traverse with 4 card types, and they can get a Death Shadow. There we go. Alright, so opponent with a very good start here. So Relic didn't really accomplish its goal. We had to tap out for Blood Moon, and our opponent was able to still fuel their graveyard fast enough. But we might be able to steal this one with Stormbreath Dragon. We'll see. Fatal Push on Arbor Elf. Death Shadow puts us down to 14. So technically, if we can draw a red source here, we could still get there with Stormbreath instead of Molten Rain, and we don't have double red, so we just have to say go. A Kitchen Finks would also be nice here, as it can buy us a lot of time. Opponent with red mana also, so I expect this to be a Temur Battle Rage, which could just be lethal here. Nope, instead we just go to 7. And there's Blood Moon a few turns too late here. Let's see if the opponent had another Stubborn Denial, or if they just let it happen. It does work, but we are just dead to the 7/7 Death Shadow. Alright, so this one didn't quite work out the way we wanted to. Oh well, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand could be a little bit too slow since we don't have any of our accelerants, but given that we're on the play and we can go Blood Moon into Bloodbraid or Stone Rain, I think this is still a keep. And we'll lead with a forest, say go. On the draw I would definitely mulligan. It looks like our opponent with a turn 1 Sheldock Isle, so we could be up against a mill deck. I don't hate our chances against mill here, since our opponent's not going to be off to a fast start, which is going to give us time to set up Blood Moon, which will also shut off the Sheldock Isle. And Utopia Sprawl turn 2. Alright, I think we'll be casting that on our forests and name red. So had we been on the draw, we could have actually cast a turn 2 Blood Moon, but this is still fine. And there's Hedron Crab, which is gonna speed things up for the opponent, since that's a quick way to mill us out. So Acid-Moss, Stone Rain and Stomping Ground go to the graveyard, and our opponent has a second Hedron Crab as well. Let's see, picked up another Blood Moon. We could just jam Bloodbraid Elf, which I actually don't mind here, since this is kind of a racing situation, and I don't think the Blood Moon is going to do enough, given that our opponent has a basic island in play. So let's jam Bloodbraid. Hope to cascade into something powerful here, and Courser will do. And we'll attack for 3. And Forest on top means next turn we can jam a Stormbreath Dragon. A third Hedron Crab? Well, we might actually lose this race to all these crabs, since our opponent gets to mills for 9 whenever they play a land. And there's a Forest on top once again, so we could still be able to cast Stormbreath next turn. And Mesmeric Orb is also an issue, since that'll start milling us for quite a bit every turn. So we get milled for 4 here. There's a land on top, which we will play with the Courser. And now the question is, do we jam another Bloodbraid? Do we jam Stormbreath Dragon? Do we play Blood Moon or Stone Rain first? Opponent's got 3 cards left in hand. If one of them is Ensnaring Bridge, we are probably just dead. I think our best bet is to jam a Stormbreath Dragon here, just to increase our clock. So let's fetch, get a Forests, and gain a life, and then run out to Stormbreath Dragon. Attack with everyone. So we're attacking for 9 here. Opponent gets milled for 3, and there's a Crypt Incursion going to the graveyard, as well as a Fatal Push. And there's a Dream Twist in the opponent's graveyard as well, which they can flash back for 2 mana. Opponent's gonna cast a Glimpse at the Unthinkable, so we're down to 21 cards in our deck. And a whole bunch of Mesmeric Orb triggers. And there's a Windswept Heath on top of our deck. Not even sure we're supposed to play that. So I think our best bet is to play Blood Moon and Stone Rain and hope our opponent just doesn't hit a land drop for all the Hedron Crabs, since we're not really beating that. And then by playing Blood Moon we shut off any potential mill cards our opponent has in hand. I think we're fine attacking with all creatures here. And then we'll see how our opponent blocks, maybe that changes our decision. Our opponent happy to chump with 2 crabs, which does kind of indicate that they might have more mill spells in hand and therefore don't need to rely on the Hedron Crabs. So I think playing the Stone Rain and Blood Moon here is correct. And we're not gonna play the Windswept off the top, just to not mill ourselves for one. So let's start by casting Stone Rain on Sheldock Isle, and then casting Blood Moon. And hope that we can get there. And alright, our opponent scoops it up, so we barely managed to beat mill here in game 1. Onto sideboard, where we get to board in cards like Choke, Trinisphere, Ancient Grudge can deal with Mesmeric Orbs and Ensnaring Bridges, and Abrade can deal with Artifacts and Hedron Crabs. Don't think we need the Anger of the Gods. Relic is also interesting, as it could potentially shut down some of the opponent's cards that rely on certain cards being in the graveyard, but I don't think we've seen enough payoff cards from the opponent that rely on cards being in the graveyard. I guess we did see Crypt Incursion, which Relic can kind of shut down, but I don't think that's reason enough. So 6 cards we're looking to bring in, although Trinisphere is questionable. Could see shaving some copies of Blood Moon, and we probably don't need Courser of Kruphix in this matchup. We can probably shave an Acid-Moss and a Stone Rain, and perhaps we don't want both Trinispheres, we'll just try one for the time being. Alright, so let's try this. A pretty good card in the matchup actually is Primal Command, since we get to shuffle our graveyard back into our deck. So if we ever draw Primal Command, we're probably going to win the game. This hand's a keep. We've got a turn 1 Arbor Elf, turn 2 either Stone Rain or Molten Rain. Opponent with a Choked Estuary, Revealing Island. So they could have a Fatal Push here, but I guess we just picked up a second Arbor Elf. So we have a backup, although it would still slow us down, not letting us cast Stone Rain on turn 2. Opponent did not have the Fatal Push, and they also didn't have the Hedron Crab, so that's promising. But we do know they have at least another land in hand. There's an island, and it's the same one they revealed, and Mesmeric Orb on turn 2. Pretty effective here. So we get milled for 1. And there's Ancient Grudge, perfect. So I think we're still just casting a Stone Rain here, or I guess in this case a Molten Rain on turn 2. And fun interaction with Mesmeric Orb is that it also mills us here when we untap with Arbor Elf. So I guess that's kind of a non-bow on our part. And we're just gonna blow up the Estuary here and say go. And then next turn we can maybe look to get rid of this Mesmeric Orb. Drowned Catacomb. And Breaking, that's gonna mill us for 8. A few Bloodbraid Elves and lands gone. Get milled for 3. So we didn't mill over any Ancient Grudges. We don't have enough mana to Stone Rain and Ancient Grudge, but we could Ancient Grudge plus Arbor Elf and get in for 1. That's probably our best bet here, so let's get rid of the orb. Play an Arbor Elf and attack for 1. Opponent with a 3rd land and Mind Funeral. That was a pretty effective Mind Funeral, only got 13 cards left, so we could be in a lot of trouble here. Tireless Tracker, not sure we want to draw a lot of cards here in this spot. Hopefully we have some lands left in the deck we can fetch, but I guess we're playing Tireless Tracker here. Playing a fetch land, fetching up a basic forest, or I guess we can just get a Stomping Ground, otherwise we might get shut off of double red. Get a clue, and then we'll Stone Rain the Catacomb. And say go. Opponent does have the swamp. We have the Acid-Moss to blow it up, but now we also picked up Inferno Titan, which is an interesting twist. So we might just want to jam Inferno Titan. This turn basically deal 6 damage and next turn have lethal. That's probably worth it here. Jam Inferno Titan. Deal 3 to the opponents. Attack for 3. And hope that we get to live for another turn here. If our opponents didn't have the mill spell last turn, they might not have it this turn. We have the Ancient Grudge to deal with a possible ensnaring bridge. Field of Ruin, so they've got 4 mana, and they let us untap. There's a Bloodbraid Elf, so do we jam Bloodbraid? Do we just play the Acid-Moss? I guess we just play the Bloodbraid Elf here. Cascade into a Molten Rain. Could target the Field of Ruin, opponent can sacrifice it in response, so I think we just go with the Swamp. Opponent's gonna Field of Ruin the Stomping Ground. Sure. And I don't think we search here, just to not get a land out of our deck. Opponent gets the Swamp, which makes sense. Bloodbraid comes into play, and we'll go to combat and attack with all these. Deal 3 to our opponents. And we got there, awesome, and we'll be back for the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand seems good. We've got the Arbor Elf plus Utopia Sprawl combo. Opponent meanwhile on Bloodstained Mire and Mishra's Bauble, so it could be a Death Shadow deck of some sort. And Bloodbraid the draw. So I think we will still play out the Arbor Elf, even though it's likely going to die, just because we don't have any 3 mana cards we can play next turn. So there's no point in playing it safe with Utopia Sprawl. So let's play the Elf, say go. And we are probably going to see a Fatal Push on the Elf. Nope, instead just a tapped Blood Crypt, which probably means our opponent not on Death Shadow, otherwise it would be more likely to take the damage. Stomping Ground, untapped, into Whispers of Emrakul. So we have to discard a card at random. It's going to be a Stomping Ground discarded. Alright, so we kind of get to go off here. Can play a Stomping Ground untapped, play Utopia Sprawl on the forest, and we'll name red. And then we get to make 4 mana. And I think we just cast the Acid-Moss here on the Blood Crypt. Get a Stomping Ground, say go. And no play from the opponents. Inferno Titan. Could actually play that here, or we can just Primal Command the opponent's land, can try our luck with Bloodbraid. I think I just like jamming an Inferno Titan here on turn 3, that seems pretty good. And we will target our opponents, since it's unlikely that they're on Death Shadow, even though the Mishra's Bauble does indicate that, and our opponent just scoops it up. Alright, so not sure what we're up against, a Junt Delirium deck of some sort. But Relic seems a good addition here against the Delirium strategy. Don't think we want anything else in particular. Kind of like all our cards. Could see shaving a Storm Breath, and perhaps we can take out one of our Molten Rain effects. Guess we take out a Stone Rain. Try it like this. Alright, this hand seems pretty good. Opponent could have a turn 1 hand disruption to take the Utopia Sprawl, but then we're still left with some nice cards afterwards. I guess our hand could be a bit too slow if our opponent takes away the Utopia Sprawl, but looks like they don't. So get to go forest into Utopia Sprawl. And I think we name red here, just so we can fetch a basic forest with the Foothills. Opponent with Stomping Ground. And Whispers of Emrakul once again takes Molten Rain, but we still have the Stone Rain. Alright, so let's fetch a forest. And Stone Rain, I think the green source in case our opponent has Tarmogoyfs. And they didn't do anything with the Blackleaf Cliffs on turn 1. Opponent just has to say go, which is good news for this Acid-Moss. I think we continue getting basic forests. Then we enchant our forests. And name red. And then we Acid-Moss and get a Stomping Ground. And next turn Primal Command can search up a creature to close out the game with. Opponent misses their land drop. Arbor Elf to draw, play Primal Command. And I think we're shuffling the opponent's graveyard. I think that's more relevant than gaining 7 life. And which creature do we search up? I think Inferno Titan is probably the fastest way to close out the game. And then we can play this tapped, play Arbor Elf, and that's gonna do it. I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.